there's not a lot of trick statements in there. It says this is what the government can do. This is what the states will do. And anything that's not expressly defined in that simple document is the responsibility of the states and of individuals. Think of how far we've gone off track in the last 20 years, last 10 in particular, but the last 20 years, okay? Think of, as was pointed out already, what the federal government has decided to do in owning private companies and sending cash to states with huge strings attached, okay? Part of the problem that we face as a state today, and I think I speak for a lot of states, is this notion that so much of our budgets are tied up in federal money. It shouldn't be. States should be taking care of their own citizens in the way that best suits their citizens. And yet, the federal government is talking about cap and trade. They're talking about a new health care plan. States were created to be incubators of innovation. That's my favorite phrase, incubators of innovation, okay? States know best how to deal with their people, not the federal government. They're too distant, okay? States know, locals know, you know. We don't need the federal government telling us how to do those things, all right? Let me tell you how some states are kicking back, in Michigan in particular. I wrote down a couple of things that I wanted to share with you that are sort of instances of what Michigan has been doing and what we're going to continue to do. Many of you have read about this Standish prison issue. Did you ever in your wildest dreams believe that the federal government would go directly to a mayor of a community and dangle $100 million and say, we can put you on the map? Just take our Gitmo detainees, you get this $100 million investment, you'll get jobs, you'll get this, you'll get that. Would you ever believe that could happen? And yet it did. They didn't bother to come to the governor or to the legislature. They went right to a mayor. So we introduced a resolution and said, not happening in Michigan. You give us access. You give us access to the information that the intelligence committees see, and we'll decide then whether this is the right place for them. But until then, we're saying no. And for now, I think the debate is stopped. That's good news for Michigan. When I first took over the chairmanship of the Judiciary Committee, one of the common complaints I heard in and around the Capitol was of a federal judge named Richard Enslin. He was probably dedicated, I'm sure he loved his country, but his perspective on things, I think, was a little misguided. And so these people would always complain about how he was tying the hands of the Michigan Corrections Department and forcing us to spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year on prisoner health care. I said, well, why do we let him do that? Well, because he's a federal judge. I said, well, why don't you go after him? Well, the attorneys on the committee said, because we can't. We're licensed lawyers, and if we go after a federal judge, we'll lose our license. I said, well, okay. I'm not an attorney. I have no license at stake. Let me go after him. And so I did. And I introduced a resolution asking for Congress to judge this person's fitness to serve as a federal judge. The attorneys loved it. Many people thought it was scandalous. I said, I'm doing this for the people of Michigan. We can't afford to live under this guy's edicts anymore. A couple months later, the gentleman retired, and we haven't heard from him since. Just today, the Michigan Senate passed out a resolution reaffirming our state sovereignty as one of 50 states, as an incubator of innovation. That passed through the Senate unanimously. A couple weeks ago, I introduced a resolution opting Michigan out of Obamacare. That has not been heard yet in committee, but I'm hoping it will be. It's a constitutional amendment, so if we can get it through the House and Senate, you'll get a chance to vote on it. But it essentially says, federal government, keep your nose out of our health care. And finally, in the next couple of weeks, I hope to introduce a piece of legislation that is going to deal with this road funding here in Michigan. You've been reading about it in the paper. The governor put a plan on the table to increase our gas tax by an unbelievable amount of money. There's no support for that. There's really no support for any of the plans that have been on the table, and so we're sort of in a stalemate. So I like to solve problems, and I like to do it with sort of out-of-the-box thinking. My plan was, let's collect the federal gas tax that the federal government places on Michigan, and rather than having the companies send it to the federal government, where we have to beg to get it back, we'll just keep it. And so my legislation that I hope to introduce in a couple of weeks will say, companies, gas stations, convenience stores, you collect that federal tax, you send it to the state treasurer. We will give you immunity from federal prosecution if they choose to come after you, and we'll send the federal government what we think is an appropriate amount, and we'll keep the rest. No more jumping through their loopholes. We'll play by our own rules, okay? So that's what's happening in Michigan, and those are some of the things we hope to accomplish. Now, as I wrap up, let me, I thought Fred's comments on what you can do were really appropriate, but I want to add just one thing. As you study the Constitution, as you look at the information that's online, I would challenge you to go to www.constitutionday.com. It's a great website, okay? It's a great website. It gives, I'll say it again, it's pretty simple, .constitutionday1word.com. It gives you bios on the Founding Fathers. It gives you all kinds of interesting information. It even gives you lesson plans for those of you who are teachers. Study the document. Know what it says. Hold your elected people accountable. Vote for the ones that tell you and prove to you that they will defend the Constitution of the United States and of the state of Michigan. You have to do it. That's the only way you'll get people's attention. And then as you learn and instruct yourself, I see some grandparents here, I see some people who are parents, make sure you're talking to your kids. My family and I, maybe partly it's because of the job that I'm in, but we have these kinds of discussions all the time. I have 2 kids in college now, so they come home with all kinds of goofy things, and I have an opportunity to attempt to set them straight, okay? Or at least give them my perspective. I do believe that they have a right to come to their own conclusions, but I want to make sure that they're coming to the conclusions based on good information. And so we have conversations about some of these issues. And you know what? I win more than I lose, okay? So make sure you're talking to your kids. Make sure you're talking to your grandkids. We can rebuild this country.